Let's rock. Hello and
Let's
welcome to
rock.
Zero Detraction. Yeah, this I don't know what this.
It's from School of Rock. From School of Rock.
Oh,
Have
from
you ever
School of
seen
Rock. I thought you were doing
Let's
the old
rock.
Yellow
Let's
Pages
rock
thing.
today.
Fit your fingers do the walking. Wasn't that what they used to say on TV when that was a thing?
I'm
Uh,
not sure.
I don't know. Who cares? We're both too young for that.
Exactly.
And with that, welcome to Zero Detraction, a podcast about how first-time founders create companies at scale. I'm one of your regular co-hosts, JDM, aka Josh David Miller, and I'm here with my other regular co-host, Cameron Law. Cameron, how are you?
I'm doing good. Good to be back in the studio, and feeling energized now that we're in the studio after a long week of ecosystem support and supporting founders. So good to be back in the studio with you.
Yeah, it is. It is great to be back, at least a comfortable environment, just shooting the shit. That's basically what we do on these podcasts. But you mentioned like a week of ecosystem things, and there was a lot. So last week was GFX, which is kind of our large ecosystem wide conference. Conference is not really the right word for it, but event, I guess, if you will. Here it was 3 days long. I think there was 1,500 or so people across the 3 days, which is a lot for a small town like Sacramento. So I think basically anybody who was an entrepreneur had to have walked through. That's the only way the math works out. And but day two was super interesting. So walk us through day two, where you and I hung out.
Yeah, so we were both out in Elk Grove for the GovTech and AI discussion. But really, great setup. There was a mix of keynotes, panels, and then innovator pitches, and then we got to facilitate a design session. But as we kind of went through the discussions, the panels that were outlined were a mix of innovators, so people that were working in this space, but then also those that were, government employees that were actually procuring these innovations, both as customers, but also as catalysts to invest in innovation as a driver for economic development. And, one of the things that we were really looking at is how does an innovator or entrepreneur that has a solution, say selling to government, or, we can even extrapolate this into business to business where you're selling to large corporations. How do you manage that ecosystem, and what are the entry points and core values that you're ultimately offering? And so I think we're going to be diving into our conversation here of the ecosystem of pain. And, part of that is one, understanding where does pain actually exist within these ecosystems, but also, it's a pain for you to navigate this ecosystem. And that's part of your challenge as an innovator and entrepreneur. And so maybe I can tee you up to add a little bit more of, if there's anything in particular around those discussions. We had a lot of fun, but anything that stood out that kind of ties into this understanding for innovators and entrepreneurs in navigating the ecosystem of pain.
Yeah, so the fun title for us today, navigating the ecosystem of pain, which we'll have to explain a little bit what that looks like here. But one of the things that it sets apart, your average, say, B2C little, that you make and sell from something that is definitely B2G. But if you're working B2E or, either enterprise or education, or if you're doing B2B sales that are a little bit more robust than like small mom and pop shops, the process looks fundamentally different because we end up getting this separation between the user and the buyer. And oftentimes in those ecosystems, there's a lot more people involved in that as well, which is kind of our that's why we're using the term ecosystem today. And that's what our discussion is about, is who are all these other players in this? And oftentimes how you get into that sale is not how you end up closing that sale. And so it creates these really complex ecosystems with really complex dynamics. And this isn't going to be focused on the sales like strategy side of that. That's not really our wheelhouse here on Zero Detraction, but it does say something really important about how you design value propositions and how that translates into the actual features and the things that you build within the app, which I think is super interesting. And so I think just going back to the GovTech and AI innovation tour, I think is what our friends called it. The one of 3 innovation tours. And of course, GovTech and AI, we had to go to that one because, that was clearly going to be sexier than food and medicine and the other ones that they had. there, but also, I mean, how could we turn down the opportunity to facilitate a design session called Rethinking Procurement, Balancing Risk and
Ooh.
Innovation? Uh, I mean, obviously that was going to be the sexiest thing happening in the Sacramento region. Uh, but, one of the things that stood out to me, like we pull these people, like these diverse stakeholders into the room, is we had elected government officials, we had hired government officials, the people who actually do like the day-to-day job of running the government. And then we had, we had them from municipal government, we had them from county government, from state government there. We also had as you mentioned, Cameron, like the innovators there, which is a broad category too, because we had founders of early stage startups, and we had some companies that were a bit further along, and some of them were at the founder level, and others were not, and all different kinds of things. So we just had this really diverse group of people who are all sharing sort of the same motivation, and the problems that everybody in the room wants to solve are the same problems. It's not like, everybody has like some type of motivational misalignment. Like intrinsically, they're motivated to the same thing. But then the question becomes like, how do you get from the start of that, where we're trying to get to the same place, to actually getting it done? Because that's where it starts to get pretty complicated. And I think one of the things that, and we come back to like the design session part of it, I think it's kind of interesting, but one of the things I think that stood out to both of us was this like little theme that circled throughout the day of like this one tiny little value proposition that was critical for selling the thing, that never ended up, that doesn't actually seem like the thing that like anybody's really working on here. So tell us, I've teed you up, I've teased it a little bit. What is the thing?
Yes. The thing is the feature of a dashboard. So what we noticed and kind of was a core theme of like visualizing how the data is. And so part of, I think, the draw of that feature was not that feature in and of itself is that valuable, but it's the mechanism to communicate that value across the stakeholders that are ultimately engaged in the decision making. And so it kind of creates that level set for the person who's really the user may be getting the most value out of using that product or service, to then communicate that this is actually driving efficiencies or cost savings or greater impact, whatever that might be, and that dashboard is a vehicle to communicate that outward to that. And I think one of the things that I want to go back to real quickly is, as we're thinking of navigating any particular ecosystem, and particularly if it's the difference between business to government or business to, say, enterprise, like a large corporation, is the risk profile is going to be a lot different. Particularly in a government space, they're using public funds, and they have to be able to demonstrate clear value to constituents, and that their resources are being put to good use. And so their threshold for that decision making is really key in being able to communicate that value externally as well, so that, hey, your funds are going towards these things that are doing X, Y, and Z. And so it was interesting that we kind of pulled that this feature of a dashboard, which, visually does represent something, but innately doesn't necessarily always drive a ton of decision making. A lot of the decision making might come certainly before other elements of a potential solution, but this was kind of a level set standout that we found across that continuum. And so anything you want to add about I can't remember how you teed it up, but the most important feature that doesn't matter, or something of that sort.
The most important feature no one will ever use.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting about this is like it showed up, and we probably saw, I don't know how many, but we had across the government side and across the innovators, we've probably heard, about 10, 12 different like separate, innovations, and they virtually all had some type of dashboard in common. And it's probably worth just calling out a couple of examples of those, because like you have some all the way on one side, like App Orchid gave a little something on there, and and so App Orchid, like all they do is dashboards. Like that's not literally true, but like that's the result. And so that like they'll ingest data from all of the sources, map that onto a custom ontology for you, and then use AI to create dashboards. Like literally what they're doing is creating dashboards. So like that one makes sense. And so like it's no surprise, because that's what you're after. But like all the way on the other side of the spectrum, the city of Elk Grove Police Department talked about a few different technologies they use, one of which was that they have a few drones that they use, either they use in first responders calls. It's like the first responders. They surface a drone. They say they can get anywhere in the city in 2 minutes. And another technology that they demoed was how many traffic cams that they have. They're like something like 75 traffic cams throughout the city. And those, the traffic cameras, like the red light cameras, have a pan tilt zoom. So they can use those also as part of those first responder calls. Neither one of those things are very, like your dashboard. What does dashboard have to do with any of that? You want to zoom in on the camera, you zoom in on the camera and you look. You want to see the drone footage, you see the drone footage. But both of them showed a dashboard of some kind that I can't imagine any of them are using on a day-to-day basis. Like here's all the drones are, and then here's where, here's like they really had this shot of like 30 cameras at once. Like, unless you're on television, like that does not seem like an efficient means of consuming information, but they had those dashboards too. And so like, even on something that's like super diverse, we're still looking at some kind of dashboard. It's that like, if we're, aside from the app orchid case where that's literally where somebody's buying, most of the time, the day-to-day user of it, right? They're a drone pilot, piloting a drone. They need to see things about the drone. They might want to see some quick stats about some of the other drones, but like they're a drone pilot. They're going to do that. For traffic cams, they're probably calling that up, calling up particular cameras when they need to access those particular cameras because they're looking for something in that space. It's a 911 call, maybe around there or something. They even showed like flooding when there was that, some flooding a few years back. They showed that too. Like we can look in and, check public safety. So these like tactical things that if you're like talking to the individual person who's using it, they're going to look at this and say, oh, I love being able to look at, I can activate this camera anytime I want, or I can look at this, like the position of this drone. But when those people have to sell this thing to their boss who actually writes the checks, and it might not even be their boss that writes the check. It might be their boss has to get somebody from a completely different department authorize the check. So as these things pass through, the value proposition sort of shifts and away from the thing that was probably most important, or the small set of things that were probably most important to them. And what surfaces out of that oftentimes is this dashboard. It's that the higher ups, they want to see this dashboard. And so I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think just the only addition in relation to the Elk Grove PD example was the dashboard they had created was a demonstration of prior months times to, a call to then now where it was in this current month. And so it demonstrated the like expedience or how quickly they were getting from one call to the next from the prior months or years past. And so it kind of had that data of like, oh, well, now we're able to respond to more things, or we're allocating resources more effectively, which, a responder, going to a call probably doesn't care as much. They just want the quickest path to get there, which is what the drone footage was. But then as you kind of move up the layers of, say the government agency, that value had to shift for ultimately who was ultimately, going to make that purchase along that lens of things. And so that's where you're like, I think as an innovator or entrepreneur is understanding that ecosystem in which your initial, maybe who you think is going to be your customer, they might not actually have access to budget, right? And so it's like, okay, they definitely would drive value, but who do they have to then convince or demonstrate value to? And what is that value shift, right? And so it's like, okay, this makes my life easier. If I can't purchase it, I need to ask my boss for this. And in making my life easier, what does that do for them? Does that, now allow me to respond to more calls, or does that allow me to save money because I don't have to work overtime? Or what is it that I'm then able to communicate to that next level? Because then they ultimately are getting some value that they ultimately will push that forward. And so as we're looking at that kind of ecosystem, JDM, can you share a little bit more about like some of the different roles people take? And, we use a lot of jargon, but I think it's valuable sometimes as we're trying to communicate our business of, users, customers, saboteurs, some of those types of things in our ecosystem of pain, as we would say.
Yeah, I think so. I think starting with why we call it the ecosystem of pain, right? This is, as everybody knows, like entrepreneurship is solving pain for money. And that's what we do. And so within that context, because we have more than one customer, there's necessarily more pain, and that pain can be different throughout the ecosystem. So you have to think about it as this ecosystem of pain, which also sort of describes the entrepreneurship itself. Because you have to live in an ecosystem of pain for a while. So you head into the trap of sorrows and whatnot. But so you have to think about this broader ecosystem of pain, and that introduces all kinds of interesting aspects and interesting elements and interesting characters in the process. So the users, I don't think there's like probably a lot that makes sense to spend time talking about, because that's the one everybody knows. It's the easy one. Like, it's how you encounter it every day. The line worker has some issue, we can solve it, right? So, great, cool. But then as you head up, like I'll use the dashboard as a way to get into some of these other characters. So like there's kind of something doubly interesting about the dashboard example, because one is, as you get above that line worker and you get into broader leadership, they care necessarily about things more abstract. They don't have that day-to-day job, but they do care about some of the like metrics that you might track around that. So you think like, oh, dashboard, hey, I want to give you visibility into all these things that the line workers are doing, and you can see these things at a broader scale. So that becomes much more interesting now, is that for those people, is that it's not the line everyday, day-to-day stuff. They care about the big picture, right? So a dashboard is by definition a bigger picture when done well. So like that's one aspect, but then there's a second aspect of the dashboard too. So like, instead of just their bosses who might be involved in that process, we can also use the dashboard as a proof of value. And I think you were alluding to this a little bit too, by talking about like response times, like with Elk Grove PD, and like showing on the dashboard changes in response times. What we're really doing here is signaling a proof of value. And so that is helpful both in the like sales process, as well as justifying the ongoing expenditure, afterward, is that like we can show like the proof of value for the very thing that we sell. Even it's like the dashboard sometimes for certain people in that ecosystem, like the economic buyer, is often just a tool that we use to demonstrate that the thing is valuable, even if the economic buyer will never actually use said dashboard, right? So it's kind of a weird real thing there. So like, you have some of the sponsors, we'll just call them, like those higher ups. So you have the users with sponsors. We have like, we usually call the economic buyer. That's the person who controls the purse strings at the end of the day. And then you drop saboteurs, and saboteurs are interesting. And they're ones that are oftentimes neglected, I think, when founders are getting into, they don't have a lot of sales experience and they get into like the B2E or B2G side of things. And the saboteur is like, it sounds like scary and everything like that, but it's really just, who is it in that organization that actually doesn't want the sale to go through? So this is a really common way for this to happen, is if you're selling a technology into enterprise or into government, and they have IT, like the companies have IT. And oftentimes by adopting this solution, it means something either from an ego perspective or from a budgetary perspective that's getting taken away from the IT group. And so at that point, like this, they are just motivated not to want this sale to go through because it negatively impacts them. And so you have to understand the pain that you're creating in that ecosystem, and then understand what is either that's something you have to navigate and work through, or it's something that you have to deal with in the value proposition and make it valuable for that person too, so that to offset the pain that you're creating. So I think that's the ecosystem, I think, at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, and just two additions. So I think one, as we think of the like saboteur, there's certainly element of in these environments is like understanding what they're often jockeying for, I guess is the term that comes to mind, right? Is it budget or resources, or I want to work on these types of projects. The other is change, right? Oftentimes people are working in these larger organizations, kind of having, hey, I'm good with the day to day and continue to push things forward, but not necessarily in the term of like, oh, I want to totally change and adopt all these new technologies, which is going to require me to like learn new things and, and understanding what that impact might be, and that those people can rally, opposing support for this thing not to ultimately come through. And so understanding those needs and what that ecosystem of pain looks like. The other element I wanted to add in, particularly to the dashboard and kind of the proof of value idea, I'm thinking, I'm not going to say the company's name, but was they had this dashboard of a user, and they obviously had like a graphic of the person, that an avatar. And it was like, what I remember you asked over was like, hey, I wonder how they got that picture. Meaning, like, is there actually that a part of the profile? And I use that mainly as an example, is that you can use these dashboards as a demonstration to test actually what
Right.
value people want to get, right? And so it was like, oh, here's the dashboard that could be created. It saves X number of time, or here's the number of resources saved, or is it here's number of activities done, or whatever that might be. And you can start to see, using that kind of proof of value, what they actually really want. And like, oh, I don't really care about that metric. That's not something that's really valuable to us, but I'd love to see something like this that then demonstrates that, oh, for that economic buyer, that persona, that's actually what's driving their decision making. And so you can use that dashboard as a testable artifact as you're going through that particular process. So just wanted to add those two specific things as we're going through that.
Yeah, I'd love to build on that actually a little bit. So I did just notice while you were talking that the studio had the wrong microphone selected. So apologies if the first 2/3 of this had shit audio from me. I'll see if I'll fix it as best I can in post, but it should be fine for now. But that idea of like, proof of value and using dashboards, this is something that I think is sometimes neglected in the prototyping process. Is that, like, oftentimes we think of, and I think when I talk about rapid prototyping, I almost always do the same thing, which is we say like, okay, a rapid prototype is like this facade, the semi-real, like seemingly real facade of the thing that we want to, that people would end up being using at the end of the day. It's the few screens of the app and a critical path that shows this really high demonstration of value, this wow moment, magic moment, whatever you want to call it. But it doesn't have to be that. Like, you can rapid prototype something that is sort of pointing in the direction of the value that you're creating without actually duplicating the screens. And a dashboard is a great way to do that, because what a dashboard should be showing at the end of the day is the value that you're creating, right? You're giving them insights into things, because like a dashboarding and data visualization, I once upon a time, that was a world I lived in, and you're only doing a small number of things, right? You're either summarizing, you're calling out exceptions, or you're surfacing insights, right? Like, that's basically it. That's all a dashboard does. And it's a decision-making tool. That's a decision support tool is usually what we would call it. That's like all it does. So if you think about those categories of things, of like summarizing things, you're summarizing what got did, which in theory is the part of the core value that you're creating. And then, calling out exceptions, like, that's valuable. Something goes wrong or something is not as expected. You can signal that that's valuable too. This drone battery is low, right? Or, hey, like, this person's risk score is really high. Maybe we double check this thing, something like that. Or surfacing insights, which is like principally what App Orchid, for example, does with their dashboards, is using AI to present data in ways that you didn't ask for, in the hopes that it's valuable. And then their model learns over time about what's valuable, what that particular individual user finds valuable in the data. And so, like, that point, you're surfacing, like, giving them real insights about the data that they would not necessarily have known to ask for, or maybe they would have, and, it's just super interesting anyway. And so if you're able to create a dashboard, a fake dashboard, a prototype dashboard, and you put that in front of people, you can get that reaction to what the things that you think are valuable. And if this goes on a dashboard and they don't find that valuable, that's a pretty strong indicator that it wasn't something that was super valuable in the first place. And then it has the added benefit of, you can use that for the personas where you might not be able to use another kind of prototype because it's too specific to the job of the line staffer, and not something that's important to the sponsors or to other stakeholders or the economic buyer or saboteurs or anything else.
I'm thinking through something, and maybe I'll pose the question out loud, because I was kind of connecting a dot. Whereas oftentimes, we ask the question of founders was like, quantify the value you're creating, right? Like, that's often a question of like, okay, is it, you're going to save this amount of time, this amount of money, even this is, business to consumer, right? Like,
Yeah.
how are you quantifying the value that you're creating? I wonder like what applying that kind of like dashboard concept, like generally as a, like not as a way to actually go build the dashboard, but to demonstrate that value in a way to like see, is this actually the value proposition? Because oftentimes I feel like we miscommunicate the language of the value that we're driving versus like dumbing it down to like, this is, I think, the metrics, the quantifiable value that we're generating for you. And here's maybe visually what that could look like. I'm like, oh, I care about this, but not this thing. I wonder, any ideas, or does that spark anything of like different ways to maybe test it? Or have you seen other people test it just generally, even with the intent that maybe they don't have dashboards as a feature of what they're really building?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's actually pretty straightforward, right? Like, again, like a dashboard's supposed to surface the things that are valuable and interesting. And so if you want to test the things that are valuable and interesting, putting them on a dashboard is a great way to do that. I think that just makes sense. But what you were saying actually reminded me of the Sacramento Innovation Challenge that we've been, kind of going through all year. Is that as we hit this like proof of value phase in it a couple months ago, or I think a couple months ago, and time has no meaning anymore. But whenever we hit that, in Q3, something like that, it became time to say, all right, so what we want to do, like the whole point of this challenge is to measure ambulance patient offload time, the time it takes for a patient to get off the ambulance when the ambulance arrives to under the care of the hospital. There's a lot of nuance associated with that. That's all super interesting, but outside the subject here. So, but we'll just say we're trying to measure that. And so as we start to think about that, like how do we go about the process of automating the measurement of that and making it super reliable and super trustworthy, but also super granular so that the EMS staff in the hospital can then optimize against that later and get those times down, which is ultimately what they want to do. They can't get the times down to understand where the time's going. In order to do that, you have to measure it, right? So we're starting here. But when it came time to like a show proof of value, it wasn't about how do we go and start the tracking of the time, or how do we go stop the tracking of the time? Even though those were important components for it, it was, well, let's throw a dashboard together that shows the important like metrics of these things. And one of the things that I think was super interesting is on the dashboard that our partners ended up creating were things that were not like directly tied to that, but were directly tied to the value that people want to get out of the use of the thing. So it was, here's our APOT, our ambulance patient offload time for the last, X period of time. And then it was, here's it decreasing over time. And here's where we have an issue where we want to address APOT. And here is some bringing in some external traffic data, some publicly available traffic data that, surfaces into this, and we can see how traffic impacts APOT or whatever. And so like, it's that usage of it where if we had done a dashboard or any other type of solution where the proof of value was in the measurement, which is literally what we're doing. That's the whole point, is to get the measurement, right? And if our proof of value was in the measurement, it would never get to pilot, because it's not, even though that's exactly what everybody wants, it doesn't signal the real value, which is what you do with the measurement. And so like when you were talking about that, like that's actually what came to mind for me, is like, we just did this. And we had just like used the usage of the data, and it just happened to be in the form of a dashboard by coincidence here. But like to say that like, this is the value that people are expecting to create about it. This is why their life is better afterward. So we're going to use a dashboard that shows why their life is better, and not actually create a prototype of the features that are making the thing work.
For sure. Well, I mean, to that point, I know one of the pushbacks we've usually got, like, especially even this example, is who's going to pay for it and things of that nature, right? And so I think one of the things as we look at that is you now have value drivers that you can go back to. Is like, oh, well, if we're now more efficiently using resources, we therefore can use those resources to fund this thing that allows us to have better insight into our scores, right? And so it gives you more bargaining power within that conversation. Oftentimes when you're clear and specific on the value that you're driving, it allows you to demonstrate like, yes, it maybe does cost something, but the cost savings is greater, or the outcome generates more revenue, or there's greater impact, whatever that might be. So you can tie that investment to the outcomes that you're ultimately seeking to achieve, versus it being kind of a leap that they can't fully connect. And so using that in the ecosystem of pain, I think, can be beneficial to you.
Absolutely. I think that's as good a place as any to round out what is really an endless conversation on the ecosystem of pain. We're basically out of time here anyway. So that'll conclude the conversation around the ecosystem of pain. But this would not be Zero to Traction if we did not leave you with some frivolous thoughts to end or start the week. I guess actually it's the beginning of the week to start your week off. I'll go first because I'm actually going to connect back to your lesson from last week, your frivolous thought, which was you were talking about Bake Off, talking about the Great British Baking Show, which now Deb and I are catching up on. So we're watching it, and you were right. This is weird. There's something weird going on, and the one so I won't repeat exactly what you had said last week. This is the one thing that stood out to me that I thought was weird, is at one point, a guy just walks out of the tent and he's just done. And he's just off the show now. I've never seen that before. And it was the one American that I think that they've ever had on the show. So I don't feel great about that. The American left. But it was just, and they don't really explain much. There's obviously some things going on behind the scenes. All they ever said was he was a little bit lightheaded. And basically just said, yeah, I'm done. This isn't going to work. And literally just turns around and walks out of the tent. And one of the hosts, it chases him outside and literally outside the tent to talk to him. And this is I don't know what to make of any of that, but that's stuck in my head now, is that somebody just walked out of the tent, and it was the American, of course. So yeah.
Well, a couple of things that is I wonder if he got paid the full, allotment of whatever. I don't know if they get paid or however that's structured, but it was oh, you obviously just quit on the show and we're maybe only on for 10 total minutes based on, not being there for one of the episodes and then walking off. So did you get to Bread Week yet or no?
No, we have, we just finished last night, the second one. So the third one is and I think there's only the 3 that are out as of the time that we're recording this. So, no, we haven't hit Bread Week yet. We just did Biscuit Week.
There you go. Nice. Well, Bread Week is a good one. So no one faints. So I'll let you know that, but,
yes,
yes.
You weren't kidding about
but there is a funny thing, and I'm not going to spoil it, but it was the Paul Hollywood handshake. There's something in that general sphere that's kind of funny. So something new is created out of that. But
interesting.
I guess my frivolous thought, what first came up for me was I guess I'll stay in the vein of a show as well, since we're kind of downloading after the busy week. And so we started watching Starting Five, which is about some of the different NBA stars. And what we're super excited was DeMontis Sabonis is one of the 5 that's featured. And so it was fun just to see, his overall kind of life amongst, LeBron James and Jimmy Butler and a number of other stars. But the one thing that frustrates me is Sabonis, who plays for the Kings. He doesn't actually live in Sacramento. So it's he's set up of him living in his Napa Valley home. And, he commutes to Sacramento. And I was what a bad look. So I was that kind of frustrates me, is the star chosen for the Kings doesn't live in the greater Sacramento region, unless we are now maybe a part of Napa, I guess. I don't know if we, adopt Napa into the region. But that was just kind of what's been, Macron my side, I guess, or whatever you're saying is.
I have mixed feelings about it, because one of the benefits of Sacramento is proximity. So we're just barely over an hour to Napa. We're, an hour and a half from the Bay, 2 hours from Silicon Valley. We're an hour from Tahoe. Farms are, they're just 10 minutes that way, right? Proximity is one of our values. And so is he highlighting the value of said proximity, that he can play for the Kings and live in wine country? Or is he giving the middle finger to Sacramento and saying, I ain't living there. I'll play for y'all. You can give me money, but I'm living out here. I don't know. I don't know which one he's saying there.
I don't know. Maybe put it on a dashboard and see, time to this, or that's it. But no, I like that example, and I wouldn't, I don't expect him to live in the Sawyer and walk across the, Doco Plaza to the arena. But it seems like a little bit of a commute, but obviously that proximity is key. And, I don't know if he drives himself every day. But, if not, then yeah, it's not too bad. So,
Yeah, maybe he's got a little,
yes.
apartment in the Sawyer for when he just needs to be here, in town.
Right. This is true. Because I mean, how far you spend more time in the wineries than I do? You're much more of a wine connoisseur than I. How far is that exactly? Is it like an hour and 20 or something?
It depends on where. So like, if you you head down 80, and then as you get like to the far side of Fairfield, that's where the cutoff is. And so to there, it's 45 minutes. Like it's
Right.
not very far. And then you're just boop, over the hill, and you're in the start of Napa. But that's not like from a wine perspective, at least the interesting part of it's the industrial side. And so then you have to keep going. And so like the city of Napa is, an hour and 5 minutes, hour and 10 minutes from here, at the most, unless there's a lot of traffic. And so, but that's like Napa, but the city of Napa is on the south end of the valley. So
Right.
if you're like, for example, you're going up to Calistoga, it's another half hour.
Right.
And St. Helena is not far south of there either. So it's really going to depend on where in the Napa Valley you are. So it's going to be somewhere between an hour and 2 hours, probably.
All right.
And
So fair enough. It might be like then like living in Auburn or something, and that's close enough. That's still the region. So, or
I
maybe a little past
So
Auburn.
I don't know if Napa considers themselves part of the Bay Area, but should we just own them? Should we just take it? Like, and
I
can
think
we
we should. I
annex
think
Napa
let's
as
just
part
say
of our
it's
metro?
part of the greater Sacramento region. Yeah. Let's do
That's
it.
right. Yeah. All right. That's
Why
it.
not?
We now own. Not own. That's wrong. We now stake claim to the wonderful land of
And
Napa.
we've incorporated them into our general sphere.
We just need to, get the, BLS and other government divisions to recategorize it appropriately, and all will be well in the world. But with that, we are out of time. Thanks for hanging with me, and we spoke for a whole half hour on dashboards, if you can believe it.
In mapping your demonstration of your ecosystem of pain through a dashboard.
Yes.
That
Well,
could be a cool. Like,
what
how
would be?
valuable is the pain in your ecosystem?
There's we need every entrepreneur should have a dashboard of their ecosystem of pain so they understand where all the pain is going. But anyway, that's all the time we have for here. So thanks for hanging with me. For those of you out there, you enjoyed the show, like, subscribe, follow, whatever app you're listening to, give us a 5-star rating. Really helps us out. Or at a minimum, you know what? Just tell a friend about us. Tell a friend to listen to Zero Detraction. Tell them that you were mildly entertained and sort of are lukewarm with the recommendation, but nonetheless, it was worth saying out loud. We will take it. That'll be fine. If you want to say how much you hate the show, that's all good too, because there's no such thing as bad press. And we thank you in advance. And thank you, Cameron, for hanging out with me today.
Thank you, and we look forward to next time. So we hope to hear and have you engage, and we'll chat next time.
Awesome. See you guys.
Cheers.